Arthur Blank didn't hire Kevin Stefanski to restart the quarterback carousel. He hired him to stabilize it. But reports claim that behind the scenes, Stefanski is already pushing the Falcons to go get another quarterback, basically telling the front office to bench Michael Penix Jr. before he even gets a real chance to take control of this team. And if that's even half true, Atlanta has a problem bigger than play calling. Because this roster is young, explosive, and built to rise right now. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, a fan base that's been begging for direction. And instead of building around the guy they invested in, it suddenly feels like the new coach is trying to import his solution the moment he walks in the door. That's why the mood around the building is reportedly tense, and why Cam Newton's old warning is trending again. We've seen what Stefanski does when the quarterback situation gets complicated. Now the question is simple. Does Atlanta protect Penix and the plan, or let the new coach blow it up before week 1? Here, why this story is hitting Atlanta like a flashbang. It's not. The Falcons might add a veteran backup. Reports claim Stefanski is pushing for a move that would asterisk change the franchise's direction, not just protect it. And the second a head coach walks into a building and starts lobbying for a new quarterback, everybody hears the same message, whether it's said out loud or not. I don't believe in the one you've got. That's why Arthur Blank is reportedly furious. Because Blank didn't spend years investing in a young core just to turn the most important position into a weekly reality show again. Atlanta wasn't supposed to be in tryout mode. They were supposed to be in build and climb mode. And Michael Penix Jr. is supposed to be the centerpiece of that climb. Now the Stefanski baggage makes this rumor even louder. People keep bringing up his Cleveland run and the quarterback churn, 13 different quarterbacks, constant instability, and a reputation for never fully settling the room. Even if some of that was out of his control, the perception is brutal. Wherever Stefanski goes, the quarterback conversation never stays quiet for long. So if you're Blank, you're looking at the same nightmare you thought you were hearing away from. And if you're Penix, the message is even colder. A new coach didn't draft you. A new regime doesn't have its pride tied to you. If they pivot off you, they can frame it as, we inherited a situation, and start fresh with a quarterback that makes the staff look smart. That's why bring in a new QB rumors don't land like normal competition talk. They land like an exit ramp being built in real time. This is also why the fan base is reacting like the season already started. Because you can survive a lot in the NFL, injuries, tough schedules, even bad losses. What you can't survive is uncertainty at quarterback that starts at the top. The moment the coach signals he wants someone else, the locker room starts hearing footsteps. Receivers start wondering who they're building timing with. Veterans start watching the press conferences for scapegoat language. Sponsors start bracing for controversy instead of campaign themes. And it's happening before the first training camp practice. That's the part that makes it feel reckless. Not because exploring options is evil, every team explores options, but because timing tells the truth. If the first big internal push is new quarterback, it suggests Stefanski isn't here to develop what Atlanta already has. He's here to replace it. And that's exactly why Blank is reportedly at a breaking point. He didn't hire a coach to blow up the vision. He hired a coach to finish it. But that wasn't the only shock inside the building. Because once this rumor started moving, it exposed an even bigger question Atlanta can't avoid anymore. Is this roster actually being treated like a rising young team, or like a blank canvas for a coach with control issues? Here, what makes the rumor so infuriating to Falcons people? Atlanta is not a broken roster begging for a reset button. This is one of the youngest, most explosive skill groups in the league. Drake London isn't a maybe. He's already a real weapon. Kyle Pitts is still a matchup problem when used correctly. Bijan Robinson is the kind of back who can carry an offense for stretches and make a quarterback's life easier with one cut. That's not a teardown situation. That's a pick the right direction and hit the gas situation. And that's why the idea of Stefanski walking in and immediately pushing for another quarterback feels backwards. If Penix is the plan, you don't start the era by shopping for the next plan. You build the offense, stabilize the staff, and let the young QB grow with the young core. That's the whole advantage of having a roster like this. Your quarterback doesn't have to drag a rebuild. He gets to grow inside momentum. So when reports claim Stefanski is urging the front office to acquire a new quarterback, fans aren't hearing, "We want competition." They're hearing, "We don't trust our timeline." And that's deadly in a city like Atlanta, because this fan base has already lived through years of watching potential get wasted by indecision. They don't want another season where the quarterback story changes every 2 weeks depending on who had a bad quarter. It also doesn't help that Stefanski's reputation is getting dragged into it. People keep pointing out his Cleveland run and the constant QB churn there. Baker, Brissett, Watson, Flacco, and a carousel of others. Fair or not, the label sticks. Stefanski equals quarterback instability. So even if he's simply asking for a contingency plan the moment it leaks, it reads like the same old pattern. And then you add the Cam Newton factor. Cam warned everyone the second this hire happened. He basically said, "We saw what you did with Shedeur and it was unacceptable." Now, whether you agree with his framing or not, it planted a seed that Atlanta can't ignore. If Stefanski mishandled one young quarterback situation before, what happens when he gets frustrated here? That's why this has turned into more than football. Some fans argue it's also about culture and control. Whether a coach can truly embrace a modern locker room with young, confident talent without trying to box it into an old-school template. Atlanta is a city with a strong identity, and people aren't separating that from how they read this hire. So from Arthur Blank's perspective, the problem isn't just, do we add a QB? The problem is that the franchise is starting to look unstable again. Before camp, before installs, before Penix even gets a clean runway to show what he is. And once that perception spreads, it gets harder to contain. Because the next thing that always follows a quarterback rumor is the thing that changes everything: public messaging. Who gets protected at the mic and who gets spoken around. Here, what most fans don't understand until they've lived through it: quarterback controversies don't start on the field. They start at the microphone. Because the fastest way to kill rumors is simple: say one clear sentence with your chest. Michael Penix Jr. is our franchise quarterback. Not "we're excited," not "we'll see," not "the coach will decide." One clean commitment. And right now, that commitment is exactly what Atlanta keeps dancing around. Reports claim that inside the building, the messaging has been careful on purpose. The kind of careful that sounds professional but feels slippery. When executives start leaning on phrases like, "We're evaluating the entire roster," or "That's a coaching decision," fans hear it as an exit ramp being built in real time. Because that's the tell. If Penix is truly your guy, you don't hide behind process language. You protect him publicly and do your evaluating privately. Every serious franchise understands this. You can still bring in depth, you can still plan for contingencies, but you don't publicly treat your young quarterback like he's a placeholder. That's how you fracture a room before week 1. And this is why the Stefanski rumor is so toxic. It makes every vague quote feel intentional. If the internet already believes Stefanski is lobbying for a new quarterback, then any non-committal answer from the front office gets translated as, "Yeah, we're listening." Even if that's not what they mean, that's how it lands. And once it lands that way, it becomes the story. Now the fans aren't just watching Penix's rehab. They're watching who gets defended and who gets spoken around. They're listening for what's missing. They're tracking whether the team says starter or competition. They're reading the same sentence 3 different ways and asking, why won't they just end this? Because here's the hard truth. When leadership won't commit, the locker room won't either. Receivers start splitting their time mentally. Veterans start preparing for the weekly QB question circus. Coaches start coaching in two directions, installing an offense while also managing a narrative they didn't have to create. And Penix, stuck trying to get healthy, is forced to watch his own franchise's confidence leak out through cautious wording. That's why Arthur Blank is reportedly so heated. Not just because the rumor exists, but because the organization is failing the simplest test a young team can pass: clarity. And if Atlanta doesn't clean that up fast, this will spiral the way these stories always spiral. One report turns into 10 turns into a league-wide belief. Then suddenly, the Falcons aren't building around a quarterback anymore. They're constantly explaining why they might not be. But that wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part is what usually comes next when clarity is missing. The league starts treating you like you're shopping, and other teams start calling. This is the part owners hate most, because it's the moment your internal situation stops being internal. The second a team gets labeled as shopping at quarterback, whether that's true or just rumor, everybody around the league starts moving differently. Agents start calling. Other front offices start sniffing around. Media outlets start connecting you to every name that trends. And suddenly your offseason isn't about building a roster anymore. It's about surviving a marketplace. That's why those alleged comments from around the league hit so hard in the competitor transcript. An anonymous GM basically saying Atlanta is in the market and that other teams view them as a top rival for any starting QB option. Now, we don't know who said that. We don't know how accurate it is. But hear what matters. When that kind of quote starts circulating, it changes behavior even if it's half speculation. Because teams don't wait for confirmation. They pounce on opportunity. If Atlanta looks shaky, other teams see leverage. They can raise the price on a trade. They can float their own quarterback as an ideal fit. They can use Atlanta as a smokescreen to drive competition and boost value. And the media helps them for free because Falcons linked to QBX is an easy headline. That's how a rumor becomes reality, without anyone ever making a move. And it puts Penix in the worst possible spot, not because he can't handle pressure, but because he's rehabbing. He can't shut the noise down with reps. He can't answer "Are you the guy?" by throwing dots in front of cameras. So the story gets told around him, not by him. Meanwhile, Atlanta's front office has real decisions to make that can accidentally confirm the rumors. If they cut a veteran to clear cap, or meet with certain QBs, or even show unusual interest in the draft class, every move gets interpreted as they're moving on. Even standard due diligence looks like panic when the narrative is already hot. And this is where Stefanski's alleged push becomes gasoline. Because if the new head coach is truly lobbying for a quarterback change, then every normal front office meeting starts looking like a takeover. Fans start asking if this is about winning games or about the coach planting his flag. If Penix struggles early, will Stefanski protect him? Or will the "we need another QB" storyline instantly become the escape hatch? That's why Arthur Blank is reportedly so mad. He didn't hire Stefanski to light a match under a young roster. He hired him to direct it. And right now, the league is treating Atlanta like a team without a clear plan at the most important position in sports. But that wasn't the only reason this is escalating. Because the louder this gets, the more Cam Newton's warning starts sounding less like a hot take, and more like a preview of what happens when a coach's quarterback philosophy collides with a young QB's timeline. Cam Newton didn't wait for the Falcons to lose a game. The moment the hire happened, he basically said, "We saw what you did with Shedeur, and it was unacceptable." And now that rumors are swirling about Stefanski wanting a new quarterback in Atlanta, people are pulling that clip back up like it's a prophecy. Because Cam's warning wasn't really about one play call or one depth chart decision. It was about a pattern he believes exists in the league. Certain young quarterbacks get nurtured through early mistakes, while others get put under a microscope immediately. And once the microscope comes out, the story stops being football and becomes character. Cam is an MVP. He knows how fast narratives can change. He knows what it feels like to be celebrated 1 minute and doubted the next. And he knows something else too. Quarterback development is fragile. A coach can either protect it or poison it. So when Cam talks about Stefanski, he's not just criticizing X's and O's. He's questioning trust. He's questioning whether Stefanski knows how to lead a modern locker room without needing the quarterback to shrink into a certain mold. And in the competitor transcript, Cam goes even further. He frames this as a culture clash, saying Stefanski struggles to embrace quarterbacks who carry visible confidence and cultural identity. Now, that's a heavy claim. Not everyone will agree with it. But Atlanta is the worst city for that conversation to be ignored, because Atlanta is a place where culture is not an accessory. It's the foundation. Fans aren't going to pretend that doesn't matter when the franchise is filled with young black talent and the quarterback is the face of the whole thing. That's why Cam's words keep catching fire. Because they connect Cleveland to Atlanta in one straight line. If the coach mishandled one quarterback situation, why would we assume he'll handle the next one differently? Especially when the next one involves a young QB, a new regime, and a roster with expectations. And here's the part that makes Cam's warning hit harder: the timing of the rumors. If Stefanski is really pushing for a new quarterback before Penix even gets a clean runway, then that looks like exactly what Cam was talking about: impatience, control, and a quick trigger to move on rather than build. That's the fear. Not just that Atlanta might add competition, but that they're already preparing to blame the quarterback if things get tough. That they're already building an exit narrative to protect the staff. Because Cam's whole point was simple. Coaches who operate like that don't just lose games, they fracture locker rooms. And if Atlanta becomes fractured before week 1, the season is over before it begins. Which is why the next move matters more than any quote. Atlanta can either prove Cam wrong by publicly backing Penix and aligning the whole building around his development, or they can validate the warning by chasing another quarterback and lighting a civil war inside their own franchise. Here, why this is reportedly hitting Arthur Blank so hard. He didn't build this roster to babysit a coach's insecurity. Atlanta has spent years stacking young, expensive talent with one goal in mind: build a core that grows together and peaks together. That only works if the quarterback timeline is stable, not perfect, stable. Because the second the QB plan becomes a weekly argument, everything else slows down. Players start pressing. Coaches start coaching scared. The locker room starts splitting into camps. And that's why the rumor that Stefanski wants another quarterback is such a problem, even if it's not fully confirmed. Because it forces Blank into a decision he never wanted to make this early. Do you let the coach run the show completely? Or do you protect the plan you already invested in? If reports are true that Blank is livid, it's not just about Penix as a player. It's about the message. Hearing a head coach and then immediately pivoting into new QB talk tells the whole league you don't believe in your own direction. It tells free agents you're unstable. It tells sponsors you might be walking into another season of drama. And it tells Penix loud and clear that he's not being treated like a franchise cornerstone. That's how confidence gets killed before the first snap. Now Blank has two paths, and both have consequences. Path 1, he forces clarity. He tells Stefanski and the front office, Penix is the guy, build it, stop the chatter. If they want a veteran backup, fine, bring in a boring one, a real support piece. Not a headline, not a threat, just insurance. Path 2, he lets Stefanski chase his guy. Maybe that means exploring trades, veteran options, or drafting another QB. But if Atlanta does that, they're basically admitting Penix is already on a short leash. And once a young QB feels that, every mistake becomes heavier than it should be. He's not playing free. He's playing not to get replaced. And the scary part is, Atlanta doesn't have time to experiment. This division isn't waiting. This roster is expensive. The fan base is already tense. If the Falcons spend the next 6 months leaking uncertainty, the season becomes a referendum on leadership before it becomes a football season. That's why this moment feels like a breaking point. Because once you're here, the wrong move doesn't just cost you a game. It costs you belief. And when belief goes, the NFL doesn't care how talented your roster looks on paper. It starts falling apart in real time. Now the next question is the one nobody wants to ask out loud. If blank steps in and draws that line, does Stefanski fall in line? Or does this turn into a power struggle that explodes before week 1? This is where the Falcons have to be careful, because the moment Arthur Blank draws a hard line, you find out what kind of head coach you really hired. If Stefanski is truly pushing for a quarterback change this early, that means he's not thinking like a caretaker of the roster. He's thinking like an owner of the roster. And when a coach walks into a building believing he has the authority to reshape the most important position immediately, it creates a new conflict, one that has nothing to do with the playbook. It becomes a power war. Because Stefanski can't admit, "I don't like Penix," without detonating the entire building. But he also can't fully commit to Penix if he doesn't believe in him, because then every offensive decision he makes will be questioned through that lens. Fans will accuse him of holding the QB back. Players will feel the uncertainty. And every time the offense sputters, the rumor mill will say, "See, he never wanted him." So if Blank steps in and forces a Penix commitment, Stefanski has 2 options. Option 1, align and execute. Build the system around what Penix does well. Protect him publicly. Correct him privately. Let the young QB develop without the constant threat of replacement hanging over his head. Option 2, resist quietly. Keep planting seeds of doubt. Ask for competition. Push for options. Leak frustration through the usual channels. If that happens, the Falcons will be fighting 2 battles at once, opponents on Sunday and their own leadership dynamics every day. That's why this has already escalated beyond normal football drama. Because the Falcons can survive a tough start. Plenty of teams start slow and recover. What they can't survive is a staff versus front office tension at quarterback. Once those factions form, everything becomes political. Every rep distribution becomes a statement. Every quote becomes a chess move. And the young quarterback gets crushed in the middle, not because he can't play, but because the building isn't unified. The Browns have lived through versions of that chaos. The Jets have. The Bears have. When the organization isn't speaking one language about its quarterback, the quarterback becomes the headline until somebody gets fired. And that's why people keep connecting this to Stefanski's Cleveland past. Not because his record is the only thing that matters, but because the reputational pattern is starting to repeat. The QB conversation follows him, the messaging gets messy, and the room starts splitting into camps. Atlanta hired him to stop that kind of mess. If he brings it with him, Blank has to decide whether he's willing to let the head coach take the franchise hostage over his quarterback, or whether he'll step in and protect the future. Because the moment the Falcons choose a side, the other side will react. And what happens next will tell the entire league whether Atlanta is a serious destination, or just another organization where quarterback instability is always one conflict away. This is what makes the Stefanski situation so dangerous. The Falcons are already being dragged into a quarterback storyline that should not exist yet. If reports are true that Stefanski is pushing for a new quarterback, then Atlanta isn't dealing with a depth move. They're dealing with a belief problem. And belief problems don't wait for week 1. They spread in February, they poison the messaging, and they fracture the room before the first install. Arthur Blank can still stop it, but only with clarity. Either Penix is the franchise quarterback and the entire organization speaks that language, or the Falcons admit they're starting over and accept the chaos that comes with it. What they can't do is live in the middle, half backing the young QB while quietly shopping for his replacement, because that's how you waste a young roster and burn a season before it begins. And the irony is, Atlanta hired Stefanski for stability. If he brings the Cleveland-style quarterback drama with him, then this hire won't be remembered for play design or coaching awards. It'll be remembered as the moment a rising young team got swallowed by the one thing that ruins franchises faster than bad talent: internal distrust at quarterback. Now I want your take. Should Arthur Blank force Stefanski to commit to Penix, or should he let the new coach chase his guy, even if it blows the building up?